but soon. I'm going on a diet.
What diet are you on?
Eggs and grapefruit.
Oh, I was on that one. Lots of luck.
It's not so bad.
How long you been on it?
All day.
Oh boy, bless these old ladies' hearts. You can't just eat grapefruit. I'm sorry. Everybody, and welcome to the Cinema Psych Podcast, the podcast where psychology meets film. I am your host, Dr. Alex Swan, and today we have a little bit of a sad one going on. The film on today's show is 2000's Requiem for a Dream. Now, if you haven't seen this one, steel yourself. It's a Darren Aronofsky film, so if you know what his stuff is in like the recent 15 years or so, Black Swan, anyone, then you know you're in for a wild ride with this Aronofsky film. So he directed it and he co-wrote it with Hubert Shelley Jr. And the film stars Ellen Burstyn as Sarah Goldfarb. In the intro, in the beginning, there's a scene with her and her widow friends, or these old ladies that all live in Brighton Beach, Brooklyn, with in the same building as her. Man, it's absolutely my favorite Ellen Burstyn performance, and she's been in a lot of stuff. But absolutely tragic. And of course, we'll get into way more in this episode with not only her story and her rise and fall in this particular movie, but the film also stars an early role for Jared Leto. He was coming right out of like a blonde hair, a few line appearance in 1999's Fight Club. Like, this was his like big acting break. I feel like it. It feels like that's the case. And then the two other big roles that round out the quartet of stories in this movie. Jennifer Connelly plays Marion, and Marlon Wayans plays Tyrone, or Ty, as he's referred to several times in the movie. A really tragic story of four people's dreams destroyed by addiction. Great cinematography and imagery in this movie. A couple of other stars that you might recognize. Christopher McDonald plays Tappy Tibbins. You only see him in the television, though. We never meet the real person. And then Mark Margolis, who recently passed away, I believe, plays an early movie character, Mr. Rabinowitz. He's got some great lines, classic Brooklyn accent in conversations with Sarah Goldfarb and Harry Goldfarb, too, to be honest. But then you don't see him for the rest of the movie. So that's kind of lame. But in any case, it's a tight story. It's about an hour and 40 minutes. It's a tight story about these four characters and their struggles with addiction and trying to meet their dreams. Requiem for a Dream. Solid performances all around. Now, why Requiem for a Dream? Well, that's a great story. A requiem is a mass for the dead. So it's a mass in the Catholic Church offered for the repose of the soul or souls of one or more deceased persons. So nobody seemingly dies at the end of the movie, so to speak, right? So this is a play on words here, right? So it's a requiem for these four people's dreams. A requiem for a dream, right? A repose for the soul of these people's dreams. And I think that's a very critical thing to know before you go into this movie. Like, this is not a happy story. The movie ends in a tragic way. Ends in a tragic way for all of these characters. Not to give anything away, I think it's worthy of your watch, but definitely steel yourself for this particular movie, especially if you have lived with or known somebody who has lived with addiction, and specifically drug addiction. And the music, which is iconic. I'm going to play clips like I normally do in these. I'm sure it's going to get flagged on YouTube, but I don't care. I love this music. It is phenomenal. You probably have heard it too. So the music that you hear throughout, which crescendos in a way, this particular piece is called Lux Eterna, and you may see it just with an E instead of an AE. It's the Latin, of course. It's composed by Clint Mansell, who did the soundtrack for the movie, and he presents Lux Eterna as a leitmotif for the four characters. So all four characters are seemingly on the up and up, and then with their addictions end up crashing and burning at the end of the movie in very tragic ways. Again, nobody dies to our knowledge at the end of the movie. We don't know anybody dies, but their dreams certainly did. But the leitmotif crescendos as tragedy begins to wrap its hands around these people, and it's phenomenal. And of course, like I said, if you haven't seen this movie, you probably have heard Lux Eterna before. It's in popular culture. It has been for 25 years now. It's been used not only in the movie itself, right, Requiem for a Dream, but it's also been used in other films and in other teaser trailers with remixes and remakes by other music producers. It is solid. And one thing that I really like, and I'm just adding, this is the film nerd corner over here. The one thing that I really love that Aronofsky does is, as the music indicates the tragedy that will befall these four characters, these four lives, as the movie progresses, the scenes get shorter and shorter. So in the beginning of the movie, the scenes are about 90 seconds, 2 minutes long. Your typical good, maybe a little bit more fast-paced, right? It's an hour and 40 minutes, of course, but a lot happens in this hour and 40 minutes. And at the end, you end up having rapid cuts with whatever incidental music might be there, and they get shorter and shorter and shorter with the rapid cuts. Love the use of imagery when people are using heroin, when the three of the four characters are using heroin. You don't actually see anyone stick themselves with a needle. You just get the famous shots of the eyes dilating, the blood pumping a little bit faster, the cell show. I mean, these are classic scenes, and filmmakers, of course, have attempted to use this rapid cutting of these different iconography pieces to varying levels of success in later movies. Obviously, Aronofsky set the stage for 21st century film in this like psychological drama kind of way. There's some great time-lapse photography. There's some great snorri cam, which is the fixation of the cam on the shoulders of the actor. And so everything behind them is moving, but their face is relatively stable. Good snorri cam. I love that snorri cam. Anyways, been talking about addiction quite a bit, and this intro is getting a little bit longer, so let's jump in with our guest. My guest host today is Dr. Melissa Maffeo. Melissa is an associate teaching professor in the psychology department at Wake Forest University in Winston-Salem. Let me say that again, Winston-Salem, North Carolina. Melissa's background is in neuroscience with a focus area on drugs of abuse. Hey, perfect for this movie. At Wake, I love it how, by the way, you guys all refer it to, at Wake. At Wake, she teaches intro psychology, biopsychology, psychopharmacology, and a first-year seminar on alcohol use and misuse. Oh, I bet that goes over really well. Melissa, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Alex. Yeah, the students really like that alcohol seminar class.
Do you give them pointers on filling their drinks with what's the name of that baby? What's the name of that baby drink? Pedialyte, because that's what I heard from my students.
Oh. I don't know if my students are on the Pedialyte. They haven't told me about that yet.
Yes.
I'll have to ask.
Oh my gosh. So last semester, one of my students was like, "Yeah, no, I mix vodka with a fruit flavoring and Pedialyte. So I've never gotten a hangover yet." I'm like, "Oh my god."
Oh my god. Oh my god. Oh my god.
Just because you didn't get a hangover doesn't mean the alcohol isn't doing bad things to you.
No.
Well,
but we do spend a lot of time talking about like calculating your blood alcohol concentration, what is actually a standard drink. So if you go get a red Solo cup of the punch at the party, that's probably more than one standard drink. So it's I try to teach them a little bit about how to not be super stupid if you decide to drink.
That's a good way to put it. It's a very solid, quick, blunt way to put it. Let's not be stupid, guys. Oh, well, we have more addiction to discuss with this movie. But before we do that, before we jump into Requiem, I wanted to ask you what your thoughts on movies and film are in general. I like getting a sense from my guests on how they view the medium with their eyes, and whether you use film in your teaching. And if you do, how do you go about that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So when I teach biopsychology, one of the things I have them do towards the end of the semester is to do this reflection assignment where they watch any movie that has biopsych in it, which is honestly pretty much any movie you can make an argument for, and then analyze it. Okay. So they have to talk about what they saw in the movie, how accurate was it, and then you can critique it, is it sci-fi, anything like that. A lot of students talk about, I have so many students that watch 50 First Dates for that,
yes.
Which is a cool movie.
Which is funny.
Memento,
I haven't had
spend
it.
A lot of time talking about memory.
I haven't had it on the show yet, which is, yeah.
Oh, you'll have to do that one. It's fun.
It is.
Yeah.
It's a really good one.
But I think, and I'm going to do the same thing in my intro class. This is the first time I've taught intro.
Okay.
And I think using film in teaching is really cool because and especially for psychology, right? Because psychology is everywhere. You can't get away from it. So it's in every single movie that the students are going to see.
Right.
So they watch the movie. You can relate it to whatever it is you're talking about in class. It's cool. The students are making connections, that they wouldn't otherwise be making. And then you can ask them to critique it, or like, what do you think that character should have done in that situation according to this other theory, things like that. So I think they can really enjoy the movie and then take learning a step deeper.
Yeah, and a step in a more artistic direction too, right? So, I've seen in the past when I was an undergraduate, a psychology professor had their students go to an art museum in Los Angeles. We have a lot of art museums, and so go explore the psychological condition with art, right? So it's another art medium that film is. So what is your personal connection with movies? What do you think about them?
I enjoy watching them with my eyes. I don't know. I think lately I've been on more of a thriller kick.
Okay.
I'm having a lot of fun watching thriller movies.
Okay. Besides this one, what was the last movie that you watched?
Oh, gee. I don't remember. It might have been Barbie.
Okay. Not a thriller,
Yep.
but
Not a thriller.
depends on how you watch it, I guess, right?
Yeah.
It could be the creep and death of the patriarchy. I don't know. We'll see. One can hope. Yeah, it's a thriller for men for sure. I'd say.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so let's go to less pink scenarios here and work our way to Requiem for a Dream. So before we get into the nitty gritty about addiction and drugs, what do you think about the movie?
Oh, I love the movie.
Okay.
It's sort of a love-hate relationship in a way. So the movie came out in 2000.
Mm-hmm.
The first time I saw it was probably a couple years after that. I don't remember what year it was, maybe 2003 or something.
Mm-hmm.
And I was at a girlfriend's house and just hanging out, and she pulls out this DVD of Requiem, and I had heard of the movie, but I didn't really know anything about it.
Okay.
And she was like, "Do you want to have this DVD? Because I can never watch this movie ever again." And I was like, "Oh yeah, I've never seen it." She was like, "Take this out of my house for me." So I went home and I watched it, and I was like, "Oh my God, I can never watch this movie ever again." And then I think I didn't watch it again for many years. Gosh, maybe like 20. And that made me feel old.
Right.
But then I watched it a couple more times, and once you get past the shock factor of some of the scenes, I think it's a really poignant and deep movie that very artfully depicts a lot of very struggling people.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Like, I saw it around the same time that you did, maybe a year or so later. This was during my Netflix binge in the early mid 2000s. So it was definitely one of those in that space. And I immediately fell in love with it. I think it was my first Darren Aronofsky film. And then I was like, I need to see more of whatever this guy had put out. And so then I watched Life of Pi. That was another movie. Pi.
Yeah.
And I was equally traumatized by that movie.
Oh, okay.
And then, much later, Black Swan comes out, and it's just like, okay, yeah, I get what this guy's trying to do. But when I first watched it, I was like, the filmmaking in this movie is phenomenal, let alone like the drug thing. Here's, I mean, this was around, transitioning from high school to college. And I had friends in high school who were doing these particular drugs. Heroin is the one that's shown most in the movie, and I had friends who were doing these drugs, and luckily I had never seen them do it, so I think I would have viewed this movie a lot differently if I had actually witnessed them doing heroin. So I'm glad for that, because then I can take a look. I can at least be a little bit more removed and academic with the movie. Even though I do agree with what you said, it's very, it's poignant to the point of showing you that not everyone wins in the end.
Yeah,
like not every story has a happy ending, and I think that's very, very clever, especially around that time with movies like. The only one that I can really think about at the same time was the year before in Fight Club, where where nobody really wins or has a happy ending in the end, right? Because even if you figure the book notwithstanding here, because I actually haven't read Fight Club or Requiem for a Dream for that matter, the narrator Ed Norton has a big hole in his head, so even if he survives that big hole in his head, it's not really a win. And so with Requiem, our four characters end up with really tragic ends, and they're all separated.
baby. We are on our way. God, it's great out there. I mean, everybody is thirsty.
Come to me. Harry. I'm so glad.
Naturally. Naturally.
So I wanted to explore in this first segment the nature of addiction and the ways in which psychologists talk about addiction, and we'll sprinkle in some scenes from the movie while we're doing this, and then I think in the second segment, what I want to do is get really into the relationships of these characters, not only with each other, but like how their addiction fuels their relationships. So, Melissa, for us, for me and the listeners, could you explain, for, let's say at an undergraduate level, how this movie shows addiction? What are the features of addiction that we're looking for when we watch this movie? And what are some of the models that psychologists use to describe?
So I think I would define addiction as a compulsive behavior to take in a substance, usually taking in higher quantities than originally intended.
Okay.
Eventually, for most drugs of abuse, developing some kind of tolerance where you have to take more to get the same effect. And what happens with addiction is when people start off taking a drug, and we see this in the beginning of the movie, it's fun, it's pleasant, it's euphoric, it's you get high and people feel good. And in the literature, that's referred to as liking. So that's kind of the hedonic pleasure that people get from using drugs of abuse. But then once that tolerance and dependence starts building up and this drug-seeking behavior kind of really takes off, that's when the person transitions into what we call wanting. And that's the wanting stage is more like the motivation to take the drug. So what are you willing to give up so that you can get more of the drug? And we clearly see all of these characters making some really huge sacrifices so that they can have more access to drugs.
Yeah, that's very true. All four of them. Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah. And the way people have thought about addiction and drug use over the decades has certainly changed and evolved as we learn more about the brain and behavior. And originally, drugs were legal, for a very long time. That's why Coca-Cola has its name, right?
Right. Exactly. Yep.
I always tell my students they replace the cocaine in Coca-Cola with caffeine. There was a period of so there was a period of time where everyone was doing drugs.
Yeah.
But then just because of political, racial stigmas, certain drugs started being seen as more bad.
Yeah.
And then people really started pushing this moral model of addiction, which is like, if you take drugs, you have a weak moral character, you're not a good person, don't hang out with those people. You don't want to be like those bad kids that do the drugs.
Yeah.
And that, that kind of stinks. And unfortunately, a lot of people today still have that mindset. It stinks because it puts a lot of blame on the addict. And it also, de-incentivizes people to want to help them and support them.
Right.
And we see a lot of that actually in this movie. Towards the end of the movie when Marlon is in Tyrone, that was Marlon was the actor. Yeah. When Tyrone was arrested, he's getting a ton of just like verbal abuse from the officers related to how he's an addict and everything. They treat him terribly.
Yep.
So people moved on from the moral model, and the disease model kind of emerged out of that. And so the disease model is really this idea that addiction is like a disease. It is essentially a disease. There's something, it's not the addict's fault that they take the drug. It is compulsive. It's something that they don't have a lot of control over, or really any control over.
Okay.
And that's really good because it takes the blame away from the addict. It makes people be like, oh, we can fix this, and we can. And I think the issue with the disease, and there's really no issue with it, it's just that it's overly simplistic. Now that we know so much more about psychology, we can kind of add a little bit more. It's not just because there's something different in your brain. That's not the only reason someone would choose to use a drug, right?
Yeah.
But it's good. It's more of a step in the right direction.
Yeah.
People started thinking about the physical dependence model of addiction. And this is true. And what the physical dependence model says is that people use the drug to avoid having these negative withdrawal phases, which is absolutely true. You know, when someone becomes addicted to a drug, they go through withdrawal. Withdrawal can be incredibly painful, especially opiate withdrawal. The only way to get out of it is to take more of that drug. But then it perpetuates that cycle of building up more tolerance and then having an even worse withdrawal.
Mm-hmm.
And that's okay. And all of that is absolutely true, except that the physical dependence model doesn't explain why someone might relapse years after they've been clean, because they're not physically dependent on that drug anymore. So there's clearly just more to it.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think in my world, most psychologists really ascribe to this positive reinforcement model.
Okay.
So positive reinforcement is when someone does a behavior, that behavior has some kind of reward attached to it. And so the reinforcer is going to increase the likelihood that that behavior happens again.
Right.
So in the simplest form, drugs feel good. So when a person does a drug, that drug is the reinforcer. So they're more likely to do the drug again. Part of the problem with this is that these drugs are powerful, powerful reinforcers.
Absolutely.
And then people start attaching meaning to other things in their environment that reminds them of the drug.
Mm-hmm.
So the people that you're with, the music you listen to, the place you go, all of those things are going to be cues for making you crave the drug a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
And then the drug itself obviously is changing chemistry inside the brain.
Right.
And it's specifically working inside these motivation reward centers, movement centers of the brain to kind of make your brain focused on doing that compulsive behavior, which is more drug use.
That was excellent. That was an excellent recap in what I would say was probably the quickest addiction class one could take. Thank you for that. I really appreciate it because, and I have a few questions for you if you'll indulge me on those. So you mentioned I'll work backwards with my recency here. So in the positive reinforcement model, you mentioned the reward and these drugs being powerful. And then, of course, the other cues that get tied to those reinforcers. So is this why many current sobriety and I guess for lack of a better term, the anonymous movements suggest not only to remove the drug from your environment, but also to change up all of these cues. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, absolutely. If you have abstained from your substance for a period of time, and then you come across one of these cues, it's going to trigger you, especially if you're already in a state of being stressed out, maybe because of something completely unrelated. Something else in your life is making you stressed out, and then you bump into your buddy that you used to do heroin with. You're much more likely to do it again. Yeah. So, but the thing is that the person really needs to undergo some like cognitive behavioral therapy in addition, because if you just eliminate those cues, you don't have a plan in place for what happens if you accidentally bump into those cues later in life.
Yeah, like
so
your former drug dealer, right? Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. So what you really need to do is kind of rethink that cue and make it not mean drug reward. It needs to mean something else, and that takes a lot of mental work.
Yeah, which calls into focus like the whole idea of just operant conditioning, and the fact that when we talk about operant conditioning, I'm teaching learning and behavior this semester, and when we talk about operant conditioning and how it is predicated on voluntary behaviors and that we can make these changes, and it's not necessarily a death sentence or you are powerless once you become physically dependent, right? Which goes back to
Mm-hmm.
the physical dependency model, which doesn't account for any psychological dependency, which is really characterized by the reinforcement model.
Just real quick, because you mentioned operant conditioning. So absolutely, I think drug use is definitely a conditioned behavior. And what's really interesting, if you kind of dive into it, there's a lot of classically conditioned aspects of it too.
Okay.
So for example, most drugs of abuse are going to raise a neurotransmitter called dopamine
Sure.
in a part of the brain called the nucleus accumbens, which is, for all intents and purposes, the reward center of the brain.
Yeah.
So when you take a drug, you get more dopamine in your reward center. But the thing is, over time, any drug cues are also going to go ahead and increase dopamine in the brain. And this
That's
has been
fair.
shown in studies where they'll take cocaine and crack addicts who have abstained from the drug. They put them in the fMRI scanner and just show them pictures of like crack pipes, and they see activity in those same brain areas. So that's a classically conditioned response. But then what
Sure,
happens is the person experiences that, and then that causes them to crave the drug. And then they do the operant conditioned response, which is do the drug.
That's very interesting. So I'm glad you brought in neurotransmitter stuff in here too, because my follow-up question to that is, so correct me if I'm wrong, but dopamine, one of its main centers of creation is the substantia nigra. Is that correct?
That is,
Yeah.
one of them. Yep.
So when somebody becomes physically dependent on it, right? So at the neurotransmitter level, right? If we're considering that to be part of physical dependence, does production of dopamine decline when so in other words, is a feature of withdrawal symptoms, which can range from drug to drug, right? Is that part of the decline in dopamine creation?
So it is so complicated to
I figured
answer
it
that
would
question.
be. Yeah, I figured it would be.
So I guess what I will say is, yes, there are definitely alterations in neurotransmitter levels in the brain when a person is physically dependent on a drug. And it's
Gotcha.
not just dopamine either.
Sure, right.
So many of these drugs work on many neurotransmitter systems.
Yeah.
And then there are a lot of different molecules inside the cell that respond in these compensatory ways to this new state of that's allostasis, right? This changed state of having drugs in the body.
Yeah.
So that's a piece of it, neurotransmitter release and production, but also the and this depends on the pattern of use and the type of drug and everything, but you also see like a sloughing off of postsynaptic receptors to receive the drug, to receive the dopamine rather. So there are a lot of cellular and molecular changes in response to chronic drug use.
Okay, so yeah, going back to the disease model being too simplistic to really capture that, and I thought I'd add to what you said about kind of like the history of the progress of these models. And it is very, very interesting how linear we as just knowledge grew, kind of linear from one thing to the next. But the crappy thing for Western cultures, I think, is the overlap between the moral model and the disease model, like that overlap, which for Americans led to the Controlled Substances Act of 1972, right? Because that started with the morality issue and, of course, all of the racial issues associated with that. But the language of the law is specifically about the medical qualities of the drugs themselves, right? And then we have this scheduling system where some drugs have no medical quality associated with them at all, and that doesn't make any sense, right? Because all drugs, all compounds are going to act on our bodies, right?
Yes.
Yes. So to say some aren't medicinal and some are just doesn't take into consideration thousands of years of prior use, right? And then we have other levels of that. And I thought that's very interesting because the timing aligns in the 1960s to the 1970s, especially in the United States. And then other countries kind of followed, other Western countries kind of followed suit, European countries and that kind of stuff. Yeah, so this is very interesting. And it's not actually a model that I've ever taught in like health psychology, for example, but I think I'm going to add it because it's good context. And you're right, it does still linger.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a really good point that you brought up, the scheduling system being based on medicinal value.
Yeah.
And you're right, the scheduling system is bonkers. It doesn't make any sense at all. For example, Schedule 1 drugs like psilocybin and LSD, which are common hallucinogenic drugs, are, according to the FDA Scheduling Center, they have no medicinal benefit at all. But even at the time in the 60s and the 50s, there was research showing that there were significant health benefits from psilocybin.
Right.
Labeling it as a Schedule 1 substance effectively tied everybody's hands to be able to do any research on it whatsoever. And it's only been within the last 10 years that people have started researching it again.
Right.
The first paper looking at psilocybin was published in 2005 after that Controlled Substances Act.
Oh my goodness.
So that wasn't that long ago.
And that's like 30 plus years of just dormancy that we could have made progress on.
This is some boss gag, baby. I mean, dynamite.
Oh man, it's something else.
Transition the discussion now to the drug of choice, at least for 3 of the characters in this movie, heroin. Heroin is an opioid, and it is derived from the same plant as morphine is. Morphine has medicinal purposes. Heroin does not. And it's odd that there's that distinction there because they're the same class of drug. And I'm sure if you had pure heroin versus the stuff that you would find on the street, sure, there's a difference there. But if you have pure heroin, I don't know. I'm not that I'm advocating for heroin use out here, everyone. I'm just saying that the scheduling and the way that heroin use is portrayed in the movie, as you said, Tyrone is berated by the cops at the end. The doctor that is supposed to treat the arm of the nasty necrotic arm of Harry, you clearly see him take vials of morphine out of that room because he's worried that, this character who's got his arm on fire is just going to go, ooh, some morphine there. Great. Time to get high. As if, right? And
exactly.
And I think the movie does a good job of displaying how the common person thinks of people with addiction.
Oh yeah, definitely. And that's back to that moral model. He completely assumed that Harry was going to steal those bottles in the doctor's office, and Harry needed medical attention, which was not really readily given to him.
Right. Oh, God.
Yeah.
Oh God.
Yeah.
So bad.
And the differences between morphine and heroin are really cool too. So the reason, people more likely abuse heroin as opposed to morphine, like both of them, you're right, are opioids. They're both really, really effective painkillers.
Right.
Yeah, heroin is too, absolutely. And heroin makes you feel really, really good.
Morphine does too, I gotta tell you.
Yep. So heroin basically just gets into the brain easier than morphine does.
I see. Okay.
But once heroin it gets into the brain, it's actually converted to morphine.
Oh, well, there you go. Somebody made the error on that one as far as like the order of operations here. Oh, but heroin has no medicinal qualities, Melissa. Of course, it's a Schedule 1. Yeah, sure. Okay, part of the scheduling system. I know people are yelling at their phones listening to the podcast. Yes, part of the scheduling system also entails the level of abuse associated with it. So it's not just about medicinal quality, it's level of abuse, right? So Schedule 1 drugs also have a high possibility for abuse. I think that, I don't know, caffeine has a high level for abuse too, but it's not scheduled. So we're getting a little far off the topic here, and I think I want to we'll bring it back to the movie itself. So We talked about heroin. So heroin is classified as what kind of drug, Melissa?
An opiate.
It's an opiate. And what do opiates do to your brain / what are the effects that somebody would have?
Yeah, so they bind to a receptor called the mu opioid receptor, which is located in a lot of different brain areas. Areas important for reward and motivation, but then also areas important for pain suppression, which makes sense. So when someone takes heroin, they're going to feel euphoric. Often it actually will cause constipation. And
It's interesting. Did not know
but
that.
they'll feel very... Yeah, but like in the zone, definitely. They're feeling good.
Yeah, and we see this with in the beginning, right, when things feel more hunky-dory, Terry and Tyrone are messing around. I think with a turntable, I was looking at it and I was like, what is he messing with? Because the angle of the camera is very weird. But Tyrone's like doing a little like a dance jig kind of thing. And they're just like having fun. There were other scenes too, like you mentioned one in our notes between Harry and Marion.
They play. Yeah. They, in the beginning of the movie, they're using drugs, but they're still in that, I think, the liking phase of drug using, right? They're feeling good. Things are lighthearted. Even the music in the movie is like kind of like warm and happy during that phase of their lives. Absolutely.
And we don't know how long they've been using either.
Right.
We start in the summer and things are hot. Things are going all things are, New York City in summertime, that kind of vibe. And I think it's meant to be bright. It's meant to be happy. It's meant to be no worries kind of thing. And then when we transition to fall, we transition really hard.
Purple in the morning, blue in the afternoon, orange in the evening. There's my 3 meals, Mr. Smarty Pants. And green at night. Just like that. 1, 2, 3, 4.
So those 3 are using heroin, and Sarah Goldfarb, she's using amphetamines, right? And so what do amphetamines do? What kind of drug are they?
They're a psychostimulant.
Okay.
So just they're very similar in action to cocaine. So what amphetamines do is they cause dopamine producing neurons to release more dopamine.
I did not know that. And so I'm thinking to myself, the first question that popped into my head is, why? What does that end up doing for the user?
Okay. So yeah, the mechanism of action is really cool. So there are these proteins on the ends of the cells. And when the cell releases dopamine, normally that protein would bring excess dopamine back into the cell for like recycling, basically.
Yeah.
But amphetamine will actually work with that protein and go inside the cell and cause that protein to like reverse pump dopamine outside of the cell. So we have too much dopamine leaving the cell. And it's a psychostimulant. So amphetamines are going to increase your heart rate, increase your respiration. They're probably going to increase your body temperature a little bit. We see that with Sarah a lot in that scene where she's with her son, Harry, and he's like, Mom, will you sit down? You're freaking me out.
Yeah.
And she can't sit still because she's taken so much amphetamines.
What is the big deal about being on television? Those pills you're taking will kill you before you ever get on, for Christ's sake.
Big deal? You drove up in a cab. Did you see who had the best seat? I'm somebody now, Harry. Everybody likes me. Soon, millions of people will see me and they'll all like me. I'll tell them about you, your father, how good he was to us. Remember? It's a reason to get up in the morning. It's a reason to lose weight, to fit in a red dress. It's a reason to smile. It makes tomorrow all right. What have I got, Harry? Why should I even make the bed or wash the dishes. I do them. But why should I? I'm alone. Your father's gone. You're gone. I got no one to care for. What have I got, Harry? I'm lonely. I'm old.
You got friends, Ma?
It's not the same. They don't need me. I like the way I feel. I like thinking about the red dress and the television and you and your father. Now when I get the sun, I smile.
And there is an interesting scene where she explains to her refrigerator, who is a figment of her imagination. The refrigerator's real, but the monster she's created in this refrigerator. So she's explaining the colors, and I'm probably going to get the colors wrong, so I'll just have the clip say it. But she says one's for the morning, one's for the afternoon, and one's for the evening, and these are her meals. Are all three of these amphetamines? Is that what I took?
So I don't think so.
Okay.
Probably the earlier ones in the day are, and
Okay.
I don't know what the differences are. And I was curious about that too. But the one that she takes at bedtime, because she has this conversation with Harry, she says, "Oh yeah, no, I'm feeling really up during the day, but once I take my green pill at night
Right.
or whatever the color was, oh, I'm out like a light." So
Okay.
that was probably maybe like a benzodiazepine, which is like a sedative hypnotic drug that probably is knocking her out, counteracting the hyperactivity that she's experiencing from the amphetamines.
I'm curious too then. So she says that so she gets knocked out, but sleep on a benzodiazepine is not the same thing as sleep, a sober sleep, I guess I should say, right?
Yeah, I've got to tell you, I don't know the research about sleep and benzos. I can tell you a little bit about sleep and alcohol.
Sure.
Alcohol definitely impairs sleep quality. So when humans sleep, we cycle through these 4 stages, right? And then we've got a stage of REM, and there's this very stereotyped pattern of how these stages go as we progress through the night.
Right.
And most healthy adults have pretty similar stages. Drugs of abuse definitely mess with those stages. Alcohol binds to some specific calcium channels that are found in the thalamus, and then that dysregulates those cycles. So you're not getting good restorative sleep when you're drinking. I don't know that benzos do the exact same thing.
Gotcha.
I'm really not sure about that.
Yeah, because I'm curious if the fact that she was taking these cocktails essentially, and so when she restarts her day after a night of benzos, that she's just making it worse. And I guess we do end up seeing that progression. But I guess what I'm thinking about now is, was I viewing this in the same way when I first saw the movie of just, oh, she's gotten addicted to amphetamines and this is what has led to her downfall. But I wonder if it was a cumulative and knock-on effect, right? So the amphetamines just made her super stimulated during the day, causing her heart rate to go up, causing her metabolism to kick up a notch, right? To decrease her rate. That was her goal. But then if she's not having restorative sleep because of the benzos, then the next day on the amphetamines is even worse and even worse, and so on and so on and so on. I'm curious if I just didn't catch that before.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I'm sure her body is so stressed out. And a big chunk of that is not having restorative sleep. I do think it's really important to talk about her progression. And how, because, when she first starts taking it, when Harry comes to visit her, she's definitely high, right? He notices, he says, "Ma, are you on uppers?" But as the movie progresses, her sanity drastically deteriorates. She's having hallucinations. She's having delusions. She's living in her dream. But what you actually see with like people who abuse amphetamines and cocaine is sort of the same thing.
Okay.
Because what they do is they increase dopamine in this specific brain area. But there's a psychiatric disorder called schizophrenia that also has increased dopamine in that exact same brain area.
I was just going to ask if there's associated here with psychosis. Okay. Very interesting.
Yeah. So, the positive symptoms that you see in schizophrenia, like hallucinations and delusions, are indistinguishable from the hallucinations and delusions that you might see in amphetamine addicts. And you can even, her delusions start getting paranoid towards the end.
Right.
Like, her refrigerator is like weight shaming her and all this.
Right.
But what was interesting to me is that when she goes to the doctor at the end, they tell her she's not responding to any treatments. I don't know why that would be from like a medical perspective, because what I would, if I were her doctor, which I am not a medical doctor at all, I would have given some kind of antipsychotic treatment, like haloperidol. I think would have been a traditional antipsychotic. It's a dopamine receptor blocker. It's really effective in treating positive symptoms of schizophrenia, and it's also really effective in treating amphetamine-induced psychosis. I'm assuming that was the drug that they gave her, and it wasn't working because she was too far gone. I don't know if that would how much that would track in real life.
That's so interesting. That's not something that I caught either, because they make such a big hullabaloo at the end with ECT, electroconvulsive therapy.
Oh God, yeah.
So I want to continue down this rabbit hole of talking about the addictions of these characters and their relationships with not only each other, but as well as with others in the film. So let's take a quick break, and we'll be back with more Requiem for a Dream. Are you a big fan of the Cinema Psych podcast? A connoisseur of the compelling stories and intriguing insights that we have on this show? Well, show your love in style with our premium podcast merchandise. Yeah, that's right. I've updated the podcast store from ultra comfy hoodies, perfect for cozy podcast binges, to sleek coffee mugs that add a dash of personality to your morning routine. Our merchandise store has it all. I've added so many new products, and it's designed to withstand countless listening marathons. There are a lot of episodes. I think you'll love them. But wait, there is more. Every week, there is a new promotion, turning up the volume on value. So keep an eye out for our exciting special promotions. Every other week, 15% off. In between, sometimes there's a special 25% off day. And then sometimes there's free shipping. It's the perfect way to score your Cinema Psych podcast merch for less. I'm excited to have expanded the merchandise offerings, but I'm really excited to say that new designs are coming up. And you can put these designs on all of the merchandise. So keep an eye out for new arrivals in the design section. So don't just listen, wear it, flaunt it, live it. Visit our merchandise store at cinemapsychpod.swanpsych.com/store to shop your love for the Cinema Psych podcast today. Remember, every purchase goes directly to supporting this show. And of course, thanks for listening to this show. I love doing it. Now let's get back into it. And we are back with Dr. Melissa Maffeo talking Requiem for a Dream. So I said in the intro to our chat today that Requiem plays an important role in this title because it is a way for mourners to mourn the passing of dead folks, at least in Catholicism. And with the music, Lux Eterna being this like crescendo of all of these negative behaviors, these negative outcomes to those behaviors, and just the tragedies that befall these four characters. I want to talk about the Requiem themselves, right? So Darren Aronofsky created this Requiem for these four people. And Melissa, you found an amazing quote by Aronofsky himself talking about the overall thematic quality of this movie. What was that quote?
Yeah, so he says, ultimately, Requiem for a Dream is about the lengths people go to escape their reality, and that when you escape that reality, you create a hole in your present because you're not there. You're chasing off a pipe dream in the future, and then you'll use anything to fill that vacuum.
I think that it not only captures addiction as a whole, right? Because the thing that you use to escape the reality is the drug, of course, and that has psychoactive effects that allows us to escape that reality. And then the second part of the title is dream, right? They all have dreams. And that's what I want to explore in this segment, the relationships between these characters, and using the discussion from the first segment about addiction and how these characters approach their dream and then see their dreams fall apart. So I want to start with Tyrone, Ty, played by Marlon Wayans, and Harry Goldfarb, played by Jared Leto. They're two seemingly, I don't know, kind of down on their luck dudes. As when we first meet them, they do this crazy thing where they steal his mom Sarah's TV to pawn for cash to get drugs, and then she has to go buy back the TV, I guess, probably with Social Security money, right? Or her late husband's pension, maybe. But she still has to buy it back from this guy, Mr. Rabinowitz. So let's talk about Harry and Tyrone's dream that they cook up while they're high. What was the dream that they had?
So their dream was really to make it big. And all of the characters had this dream to sort of make it big in a way, in their own personal way. So in the very beginning of the movie, when Harry is stealing his mother's TV set, he locks her in the closet.
Yeah.
So that she can't stop him. And this, from their dialogue, you can tell this is clearly not the first time this has happened.
No.
And he's high. He's kind of gaslighting her a little bit. He's saying, why do you always have to make me feel so guilty? But what you actually hear when she's in the closet is an orchestra like tuning up their instruments. And that's the beginning of this Requiem, right? So it's the beginning of them starting to figure out let's get some cash so we can buy some drugs and we can feel awesome. So then when they get high, one of the scenes in the beginning is they're in like a diner, I think, and there's a police officer sitting next to them.
Yes.
And you see this scene where Harry steals the gun off the police officer from his holster, and they're tossing it back and forth to each other, like with the police officer being like the monkey in the middle.
Yeah, monkey in the middle is exactly.
Yeah. But then it just snaps and it goes back to the way it was. And you realize that never happened. And that was just like a fantasy. So I love how the filmmakers kind of created these dreams, right? And so it was right around that time that they realized, oh, well, if we can get this big stash of heroin, we can sell it and make even more money. And then, Harry can live out his dreams with Marion. They want to buy, we'll talk about her in a moment, but, she wants to be a designer. They want to be rich. And there's a few scenes too, and I wish I could, maybe this is more in the book. I haven't read the book either. Where Tyrone is clearly like like reminiscing about his mother. He looks at her picture, and so that's another dream or something that he's kind of like reaching for that he can't quite get.
Yeah, that hole that Aronofsky is talking about, because he at the end when he is going through withdrawals in a prison bed or a jail bed, he's curling up thinking about her. What, right? And that's the tragedy there. And so it's kind of funny. When I first watched this movie, I lost the plot very, very quickly. Because there's a lot of names thrown around, and they're talking like maybe Brooklynites tend to, Brooklyners, however they're called, tend to talk, which might be fast. And so they're talking fast. They're talking about these gang names, these mafia names, and they're trying to say, well, you know, if we get in with these guys, then we can get some cash, and then we can get that heroin, and then they cook up this scheme when that falls apart. So I was trying to pay attention to the plot this time, rewatching it for our chat, and I still lost it.
Okay. So I think I got it. I think I can help you.
All right.
So
lay it on me.
I also, not this recent time that I watched it, but the time before, I was like, I don't understand how these two things happened, like how this led to this. So they're selling their heroin, they're making some money, they're going to get hooked up with this drug dealer named Brody.
Okay.
And Brody was the deaf drug dealer that he meets in like a limo or something like that.
I probably missed that name tied to the deaf character. Yeah. Because I was like, wait, where did this deaf guy come from?
What is happening?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the deaf guy is the drug dealer, and he's got his like cronies with him, but they're going to hook up Tyrone. They like him. They want to kind of like escalate him through the ranks of drug dealing, which is great for Tyrone and Harry.
Right.
But then all of a sudden you see the limo, like the driver opens like that little window.
Yeah.
And then Tyrone goes, wait, you got a white driver?
Yeah.
And then you see the driver is not who you thought it was going to be. And then you find out there's a gang war between Brody's group and the Italian mafia, I guess. And so there's a shootout. Tyrone escapes from it, but the cops come and Tyrone gets arrested for his, presence there.
Yeah.
And Harry has to come bail him out of jail and spends all the cash that they had made from selling heroin.
Yeah. And so then they have to find more money, and this creates some tension between Harry and Marion. We'll talk about that one in just a second. So, listener, stay on the edge of your seat here. I know this is riveting. And so they cook up another plan to drive down to Miami, right?
Yeah. So so because of just the nature of like the drug war that had been going on in Brooklyn, heroin was really hard to come by.
Okay.
And so there's this one scene where they have to go to the supermarket because there was this truck that had come up from Florida, and they're going to be able to buy some heroin from them. But then one of the other people that was there, the junkie, I think, like somebody like shoots a gun. So they shut the whole thing down and the truck drives away. So they didn't get their heroin from that like they were hoping to, which builds all the tension.
Yeah.
And there is a Florida orange on the truck, right? So it's this idea of like Florida, warmth, happiness, dreams.
Mm-hmm.
And so then they decide, well, why don't we just go down to Florida and find these drug dealers and buy some heroin from them and bring it back up here and sell it? Foolproof plan. What could go wrong?
Foolproof plan. Yeah. What could go wrong? I don't know. Having shooting heroin with dirty needles in the same hole. No, I can't do it in the other arm. It'll get messed up. Yeah, that, I think the first time I saw it, I was like, oh my God, I'm never going to do heroin.
That was a rough scene.
Yeah. And I mean, kudos to the filmmakers as well. They never show any kind of needle action. They just show you the quick cuts of all of it, right? The melting of the heroin down into the spoon, with the cotton ball, and the eye dilating, and the cellular action, or whatever that shot is of the blood or something like that. Well done. And I think to this always I have to stare at it very, very closely the next time I watch it. But I think what happens for me each time is that, and I mentioned this in the intro as well, is the editing that Aronofsky does.
Mm-hmm.
Scenes are long in the beginning. We get used to these characters, and then they start getting rapidly cut. And so if you blink, you might actually miss an important detail. And I think when it comes down to it, I'm more invested in the conflict with Marion, and I'm more interested in what happens to Sarah. And I think that's why I lose the drug dealing plot. I think of all of the moving pieces to, keep the story moving, of all of those moving pieces, the drug dealing one, I think, is the one that has too much information associated with it. And as the movie progresses, that information, it becomes overloading.
It is very hard to follow.
Yeah. So at the end of this adventure, we are left with Harry without an arm. He has to get his arm amputated because I guess sepsis or some kind of necrosis is creeping in his arm because it is so badly damaged from probably dirty needles and then continuing to use that same arm for more hits and more fixes. And so he loses his arm and he realizes that nobody's going to come and get him. Where I think they were about halfway down. And maybe you're in your neck of the woods.
Maybe they were. Yeah, they don't really say where they were. They just say that they had to stop because Harry's arm was so bad and they went to the hospital.
Yeah, and that's right after I think Tyrone says we're about halfway. So whatever's halfway between New York. Yeah.
Where the hell you think I've been, huh?
Where's the score?
Well, we had a little bit of a problem, see? I mean, everything was going good. And then some dumbass junkie...
Did what? Some dumbass junkie did what? You mean you fucked it up?
What the fuck is wrong with you?
You promised me that everything was gonna be okay, remember? I fucked that sleazebag for you, and I put myself through fucking hell for you?
There's nothing out there!
I don't give a shit! You fucking loser!
Wanna be sure we have some extra stuff? Ty told me about a guy who's holding some weight. But he ain't selling it!
Yeah.
Yeah, Ty, give me that guy's number.
What guy?
Yeah, the guy who likes broads.
Hey, tell him. What?
Just give me the fucking number for Christ's sake.
934-8777.
You worried so goddamn much? Here, go fix yourself up with him. You won't have to fucking wait around so much, and I won't have to freeze my ass off in the fucking streets.
So let's move to Harry and Marion, because I did mention what happens to Tyrone. He ends up in jail for basically being a junkie.
Yeah. I think that's worth just like taking 1 second to mention is that they're just getting arrested for being users. They're not even selling or anything like that. They're just arrested simply for using.
Yeah.
And getting really horrible treatment in their respective places.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought that up because wild that Harry gets splattered in the face with his own blood. You would think a surgeon who is going to amputate an arm would have a little bit more care. At least that's what I would think.
You would think that.
So Marion played by Jennifer Connelly, and in one of my favorite roles of hers, she had a phenomenal couple of years here because after this, she is in A Beautiful Mind.
Oh, that's right.
As John Nash's wife. And so solid set of acting years for Jennifer Connelly. And she plays this role very tragically as well, as somebody who is wistful and really thinks that her dream is attainable versus these other two chuckleheads, right? Because she's a designer. So, Melissa, what's the connection between Harry and Marion here? What are the dreams that we must hold the Requiem for?
Yeah, it's so sweet when you see them dreaming together. They are clearly in love with each other. She says that Harry makes her feel seen. He tells her she's the most beautiful person he's ever seen, and they just are so enamored.
Hmm.
And it's so beautiful. And he's so supportive of her dreams too, because she's a designer, she's a clothing designer, and he is just so invested. He's like, we're going to find a way to buy a shop and you can design and we can make it work and all this. And that's what he wants his money for, is to help Marion like achieve her dreams,
Yeah.
which is just so beautiful.
Yeah, and we see Harry's dream twice as literal dreams, and it's in the poster for the movie. So I think that's Jared Leto's eye in the top part of the poster, but in the bottom part of the poster you see Jennifer Connelly, I think, wearing like a red dress, which is kind of reminiscent of Sarah Goldfarb, and wanting to wear her red dress on TV. So I think the imagery there is meant to evoke both characters. But she's standing at the edge of a dock or a pier, and you never see her turn her face fully in the times that Harry is thinking of this dream. And it's essentially just her. It's just Marion. And that, I think, is perhaps the more gut-wrenching, gut-punching part of it. Is like, he just wanted a kind of a simple life with her in Brooklyn, right? Being able to just go and hang out at the pier. Their shenanigans in the beginning of the movie, right? When they were high and that kind of thing. They were just blissfully young and, I suppose, ignorant. Not to say that pejoratively, but they just didn't really know, right? So what happens to them? And this is the plot I can follow. But what happens to their relationship as the movie progresses?
Yeah. Well, they're using more and more. There's times you see them, she can't sleep. She had a nightmare. And she wakes up and she suggests that they get high. And he's like, no, we are trying to save what we have. And she's like, oh, we'll get more tomorrow. It's fine. So you can see her kind of suggesting to him that they should get high. So she's kind of getting a little bit hooked, maybe even sooner than he is. But he does it because all he wants to do is make Marion happy. And she kind of gets really angry at him in a couple of scenes, accusing him of messing everything up and making mistakes so that they don't have more heroin. And it's clearly not Harry's mistake or his fault that something went wrong, but she's blaming him.
Yeah.
And their new problem becomes, how are we going to get more heroin ASAP? And they don't have a plan for that. They need to have money to get heroin, and they hear about this pimp who, well, first she goes to her therapist, right? This guy, and she says, I don't know,
he's
what
a real
I'm gonna need to do. Oh God. Yeah, that scene of just him eating the steak in the restaurant is just so gross.
So gross. I'm usually tolerant of filmmaking with food, but yeah, I was just like, dude, what are you? Why are you eating the steak like that? It's gross.
Well, you know what? So I read, apparently Aronofsky that was the only thing he wanted that character to do, was just eat a steak at the restaurant. Yeah. That was his only job. So Marion, so Harry suggests to Marion that she calls him and to see if she can get some money from him. And she says, well, I don't know what I'm going to have to do to get that money. And he was like, he didn't tell her to, but he kind of was like, well, I mean, you want the heroin, right? So she does. And you can tell afterwards. So she's turning to sex work to make money so that they can buy heroin. Yeah. And after that scene, she is really unhappy with herself.
Yeah, I think that represents a shift in her character, right? It is a shift in her character's psychology, and she is absolutely ashamed with herself. And honestly, you hear about these kinds of tasks and jobs and things people have to do if you ever sit in an anonymous meeting, like an NA, a Narcotics Anonymous, or an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting. People share these kinds of things that they do for their next use, and it's really sad.
Motivation is high.
Yeah,
it is. It's very scary.
Yeah. And then she, like you said, finds a pimp.
Yeah,
and he calls himself Little John.
Gross again. So much gross. So his deal is that he has plenty of heroin, but he won't sell it for money. He will only sell it for sex. And she hesitates calling him, but eventually she does, because she wants it. She wants the heroin so bad. Her wanting is really high.
Yeah.
Her motivation to get it is higher than her self-worth at that point. And so she goes to his party, and it is very degrading and that's the scene that is pretty rough to watch.
Yeah, it is. And it's not like there's a lot of nudities. Like, it's not pornographic, I would say, but it is a scene that is meant to make a reasonable, sensible person squirm.
Yeah.
And it's intercut with her face. And I think you could make an entire class on her face in this scene. Like, you could spend 16 weeks talking about her face in this scene. And I've seen various takes on it, but my take is that she is completely disgusted with herself in this moment. Even though I believe she is high, she still recognizes that she has turned into something that she didn't think she was going to turn into.
Yeah, I completely agree with that.
And I think that's a way to phrase it, to not put any kind of sex work in any kind of victim mentality or any kind of moral mentality, right? She's doing the sex work. She's getting paid for it. Does she like it? I think that's a different question entirely.
Yes, definitely.
But at the end, it is surprising to me because I didn't remember this. It's been at least a decade since I last seen it. I think I've seen it about 3 times now. And I think that might be my last one for a while. But one thing that I didn't remember last time I saw it is so as the camera's pulling away from all of these 4 people, Tyrone in jail, Harry in his in a hospital bed without his, I think it was his left arm just above the elbow.
Yeah.
And Sarah Goldfarb, who we'll talk about here in just a second, as it's pulling away from all of these people, it's pulling away from Marion laying on her couch with her designs strewn all about her room. And she's resting on the couch and she pulls out this giant wad of cash because at this party, people are just throwing money at these women doing these sex acts. And so I guess they consider them tips. And so she's got this wad of cash and she smirks to herself, tucks it back into, like, I guess maybe it was her crotch or her armpit or something like that. And then goes back to sleep. And I'm just like, oh, I don't remember her feeling that good about it. And what did you take from that?
Yeah, I think, I think that she had to do some mental gymnastics there. Okay. Cognitive dissonance is a really uncomfortable feeling.
Sure.
And the cognitive dissonance that she was feeling during that sex scene, I can't believe I have decided to do this to get the drug. This is not something I would have done previously, but now I'm here doing this behavior and I'm not sure I approve of my own behavior, but I really want the drug. So then it's over. She goes back home. She's got a ton of money. She got the drugs that she wanted. The sex scene is over. And I think she has to be like, well, at least I got what I wanted out of it. And I think that's where she really has to make her brain go.
Mm-hmm. So my follow-up question to that is to speculate. Does she do more Little John parties?
Probably.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say probably.
Yeah, I think the way that she behaves at the end of the movie would indicate that if it were to continue. And
Yeah,
I would say, though, that might be still the end of her dream, because her dream doesn't seem to progress in the same way. From that point on, I don't think like I'm going to be a clothes designer is really on the table, right? Because it's turning into, oh, I'm a sex worker now. Maybe, perhaps.
Yeah. I think that's right. And it was really sad the way all of her drawings were strewn around her, like in a circle almost. But they were kind of discarded on the ground. And her main objective now is to get drugs and get money, which she can clearly do very easily now that she has made contact with little John. And her priorities have shifted, and that's what happens with addiction. You know, getting the drug the next time becomes your only priority, and that you can see that happening with Marion.
Yeah, it is tragic in some ways, but also kind of like, okay, well, she came out on top, so good for her, I guess. Maybe.
Yeah. She probably ended up the happiest out of all four of them.
Yeah. That is true.
Well,
but you noticed something that I actually didn't notice. What when the camera's pulling up from all four of these characters, what ends up happening? I noticed Tyrone do it. So what happens to all of these characters as they're all
having this reflective moment on their dream? They're all in a bed and they all curl up in the fetal position, right at that. It's apparently the same time.
Yeah, that's what the editing makes it seem like. They're all having this reflective moment at the same time. And I don't think I really caught. I mean, I don't think I caught Harry doing the fetal position. Maybe because I was focused on his arm. And I didn't catch Sarah doing it either. And it's probably because I was so damn focused on her hair. And I remember I remember the first time seeing this movie, 20 years ago, that the way that Aronofsky had to have filmed this to make her hair look accurate as it was growing out from gray to red to gray at the roots and red, or I guess the orange that they called it, at the top. A lot of times movies are filmed out of order, right? For one reason or the other, based on location and things like that. But it seems like he did this in chronological order.
So she wore wigs.
Oh, she wore wigs. Man, that ruins it. Oh.
But her character, because she's taking the amphetamines because she wants to lose weight, at the beginning of the movie, she's wearing like a suit that makes her add, I think it was 40 pounds. And
really?
Then like halfway through the movie, she changes into a different suit that makes her add 20 pounds onto her real body. And then at the end, she loses that suit. So it shows the, apparent weight loss. And I read in one of the things, like her basic costume, like the wig, the suit, everything. They took 4 hours to get her dressed for her role.
Damn. Well done, Ellen, on that.
Seriously.
So I'm not very good at spotting good wigs in movies. I think this is my weakness in costuming. But unless the wig is really, really bad, I think it's somebody's hair, which is a testament.
Oh, I would have thought that.
It's a testament to the costume and makeup folks on this movie, because they did a really good job making all four of these people look out of their minds.
What seems to be the problem? The weight's doing fine.
The weight's fine. I'm not. The refrigerator.
Is something wrong?
Everything's all mixed up. Confused.
That's nothing to worry about. Just get this filled. Make an appointment for a week.
And so let's move to the person who seems to lose most of that mind, Sarah, right? So
Yeah.
she is a poor old Brooklyn woman who just wants to make it big. That's her dream, right? And so we said she goes on amphetamines to lose weight fast. But what I don't think people catch, I didn't catch this the first time I saw it, is that it's total scam, 100% scam, to be on TV. The person who calls her has no intention. It doesn't even work for a TV station. It's meant to be a complete scam. No, ma'am. I'm not, Mrs. Goldfarb. I'm not trying to sell you anything. But it's a scam, and it's so sad because you hear about old ladies all the time getting scammed. Like there was this one woman I remember reading about who gave who she thought was her grandson a ton of money because he called her. He sounded like her grandson, and he knew, the scammer knew a number of things that would like just cue her to be like, oh yeah, this is my grandson. Ended up giving him a ton of money, and she never saw that money again.
God, that is awful.
Yeah, so it's just like you could like create this scam for this woman. It's also entirely possible that this whole thing doesn't actually exist. The one and the second time I saw the movie, I was like, maybe this is all in her head. The only thing I can't reconcile is that she gets the thing in the mail and she does it in front of all of her neighbors.
Yeah, so I was wondering about that too, because whoever calls doesn't ever say what show she's going to be on. We just kind of assume she's going to be on that, what's that show called? The Tappy Show. I wrote it down. I forgot the name of it.
This is one of those details that the Tappy Tibbins is, or Month of Fury. Oh yeah.
Month of Fury.
Hosted by Tappy, the great Christopher McDonald.
Yes. So that's the show that she's watching, but we don't have any idea if that's the show that she would have been on.
Yeah.
And they do send her something in the mail. And that's what I've been wondering. Well, if they're scamming her, what are they trying to get? Because I don't think she sent back money, but maybe she sent back personal information. So yeah, but that, I think that call was real. And I think that, the envelope that she gets and the information she sends back, I think that's real.
I think so too. I think I abandoned the psychosis for later in the movie, right? Where her refrigerator rumbles at her and things like that.
That's definitely not real.
Right. Yeah. And then of course, Tappy and the version of herself that she thinks that she's going to be, appear to her in that like CRT kind of resolution inside of her kitchen. And so I watched this movie the first time at night, and I gotta tell you, I was not a fan of the sounds that were being made in this like psychotic break, and the way that Christopher McDonald and herself was staring at her. Truly creepy.
Yes, it was very creepy. It was a really good scene.
And I was thinking about it, and I was like, this is how she sees herself in this moment, right? She is looking at this weird way to phrase this. She is looking at herself, staring at herself with so much disdain and cruelty. And just mocking energy. Like you couldn't even lose the weight to get into your red dress. The red dress that I'm wearing so elegantly. You poor, sick, terrible woman.
Oh God. I think of course this her storyline was the one that gets me the most.
It's the most tragic.
It hurts my heart. So she is living alone in this apartment. Her husband has passed. Her son doesn't come around very much. She wants to be in with the in group of women who sun themselves outside, and she's just not. And she just feels like her life is completely pointless. And I think that's like as a person in that generation, I think she's been really conditioned to be like, a woman's position is to be a wife and to be a mother. And if you're not a wife or a mother, who are you? You're nothing. And I think that's what she thinks, because all she wants is for Harry to have a child so that she can be a grandma. And then that would give her life purpose too. So she's alone. She is unhappy with her life. She's unhappy with herself. And then she gets this sparkle of hope, this idea that she's going to be on a TV show. And she doesn't even want anything from the TV show. All she wants to do is talk about her son and say how great he is. Yeah. That's all she wants. And then everything spirals. She gets prescribed these amphetamines. She doesn't know they're amphetamines. The doctor, when she went to go see the doctor about weight loss, the doctor doesn't look at her at all. And apparently the actor that played that doctor, that the only direction from Aronofsky he got was, don't even look at her at all.
I wonder if Ellen Burstyn knew that. Oh, that would be interesting.
I don't know. Yeah.
Because it's being able to play off of that. You're right. And that's something that I touch on in health psychology, is like the patient provider communication, specifically in these two scenes. The first one when she goes and gets prescribed, and then the second time when like things are spiraling out of control, and you get this great fisheye lens shot of her just being sucked into her psychosis. And the doctor just saying, just take these. And he didn't even like look at her or listen to her or anything like that. If this were a real doctor, you know what Harry could do? He could make all of his money by filing a malpractice lawsuit for 100%.
Oh my God.
He would win in a heartbeat.
Well, speaking of malpractice, when they get her to sign the consent for the ECT.
Right. Oh my God. I'm just going to need your John Hancock here. Oh my God. The lady is out of her mind. What are you doing? But at the same time, like, she's got nobody. There's no power of attorney or anything like that. She has no idea where her son is. And neither do they. This is like pre-cell phone era, right? Or at least like heavy cell phone use. So, oh my goodness, it's everything about that, right? In our current climate, in our current healthcare climate, you just like, you look at it, you're like, oh my God, patients' rights out the window. I do give props to Ellen Burstyn, because much like Jack Nicholson in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, I believe she watched footage of people receiving ECT so she could act properly because they just put the things to her temples and then just said, okay, go, or action or whatever, right? And so they made the sound that the machine would make, right, for the for like the Foley artists or just the soundtrack in general, and then she had to do the with her teeth grinning and her neck, just all of that, and so she did, I believe she did the same kind of research that Jack Nicholson did.
That's really cool.
For One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. I mean, we're talking like 25 years later, but yeah, and I think that's important, because you don't want to look like this ECT stuff is a cakewalk, because it's absolutely not.
Yeah. I think there's two kind of unrelated things I want to say. So the first one is that ECT, definitely not a cakewalk, but it's also not as traumatic as it used to be back in the olden days. And absolutely. How a lot of older movies depict it. Now patients are sedated through it, and it can be highly effective for some things, like treatment-resistant bipolar, for example.
Sure, right.
The other thing I was reading about, I didn't know that about Ellen Burstyn. That's really cool. What I did read, I know she observed women in like Brighton Beach, Coney Island area to kind of just see their behaviors.
Oh, I love that.
And I read that Jared Leto lived on the streets in New York for like a period of time.
I got an eye roll for this guy. He takes method acting way too far. I like specifically how he behaved when he was Joker for the god awful Suicide Squad, where he was Joker for that, and how he gave like Margot Robbie a dead rat in a box. Like, bro, come on now.
Oh.
So yeah, he's a strange one. He really is a strange one. So I am not surprised that he went and lived on the streets.
Yeah. Well, Jared Leto will always be Jordan Catalano to me.
I think for a lot of people of a certain age, that is true. Mm-hmm.
That's really the only role he's ever played.
I love it. It's kind of funny because I mentioned that he goes from Fight Club a year earlier, where he has blonde hair and he has like 3 lines, and he probably totals like 3 minutes of screen time, maybe. Which I think is so funny. And then the next year, this is like his massive film break here, and I think he doesn't look back after Requiem. He's like he's a consistent A-lister and everything like that. Not to like poo-poo on his other stuff, right? 30 Seconds to Mars was also pretty big around this, or took off kind of right after this. So he's a good actor, but he is a weird dude. And so yeah, so Sarah ends up, as we discussed, going through the psychotic break, and she sees herself with Tappy, and she ends up going through ECT all by herself. And it doesn't seem like it's worked. I don't know about you, but to me, it felt like the ECT didn't really help. And I wonder if it's because of it being, and I don't know if this is accurate, but if there's a difference between like the treatment that you said that is used as a treatment for like drug-resistant bipolar disorder, if there's a difference here with like amphetamine-induced psychosis.
Yeah, I wondered the same thing, and I really don't know the answer. Because the thing about ECT for things like bipolar, I mean, it's generating seizures in your brain.
Yeah. I think that's a good thing to say to the listeners. Like, if you're not familiar with ECT, it generates seizures.
Yes. It generates seizures. So we don't really know why it helps for something like bipolar. And the biology of bipolar is different than the biology of
so that's why I was curious when you said that.
So my gut tells me you probably wouldn't use ECT for her psychosis, but I'm not totally sure about that.
I think it fits with the overall narrative that the healthcare system is failing this old woman.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Just as it seems to fail everyone in the movie that experiences healthcare. Well, I guess really it's just the Goldfarbs it's just Sarah and her son Harry. So because I don't think we see Tyrone or Marion experience healthcare. But yeah, so it's just failing this Goldfarb family, and we get the sense that it's despair for Sarah. Like, she has reached the absolute end of her rope. Poor sweet old lady. She really has,
and she's so sweet. All she wants is a grandson and to talk on TV about how much she loves her son and late husband. But in that last scene, after she's had the ECT, she's laying in her bed in the hospital room. She's on her side and curling up into the fetal position, and she's got a smile on her face because she's imagining herself on TV saying all these things she wanted to say.
Yeah. And so would you say that she's held on to this delusion?
It looks like it, yeah. That was my take.
And I like ending conversations on a high note, but as I was mentioning to you before we started recording, I don't think we can end this one on a high note other than just laughing at the absurdity of attempting to end on a high note on such a tragic movie. You kind of have to.
It is a tragic movie.
You kind of have to laugh so you don't kind of cry, because critics have been very generous to this movie, but of course have lumped it into the genre of drug movies, like with Blow. I'm blanking on Cheech and Chong, Up in Smoke. How about that one? Yeah, I'm blanking on all of the I'm blanking on all of them. But there you go. There's your high note. Alex can't figure out drug movies off the top of his head that he read not an hour and a half ago. But so it is an easy one to avoid if you don't want to watch a movie about drugs. But I think you miss the overall message of the dangers that any kind of compulsory behavior can wrought, right?
Yes. I had a quote going through my head. Yes, I think this movie is about drug use, sure. But I think it's about, like you said, so much more than that. It's about your dreams and, but also taking care to not try to escape reality. And because if you try to escape reality, like Aronofsky said, you leave a hole in your life because you're not present. The quote, please don't laugh at me. The quote that I had going through my head at that moment was when Dumbledore says to Harry Potter, it doesn't do to dwell in dreams and forget to live. And that's kind of what they're doing in this movie, dwelling in dreams and forgetting to live. And they are using drugs to achieve that. And it's not working.
Yeah, not working. And no, I think the quote from Harry Potter works really well. Well, I want to thank Dr. Melissa Maffeo for joining me to discuss Requiem for a Dream. Before we say goodbye, Melissa, is there anything that you'd like to plug? Floor is open, and you're going to promote something, and I want to just jump in here before you do. I was at this was like 2 years ago. Well, a year and a half ago, maybe, when we were at the Top Inc., which is the Teaching of Psychology incubator at ACT. And you were there to talk about your book. And I'm so glad that you're going to talk about it, because I am so ready for it. And I can't wait for it. So go ahead. Do your plug.
Okay, I have two things to plug, and I'll do the book second, so sit on the edge of your seat, because
I'm so excited.
This first will be quick. So I am the co-director for the Neuroscience Teaching Conference, which is a 2-day conference devoted to the mostly undergraduate teaching of neuroscience. I co-direct it along with my colleagues, Dr. Katie Lack and Dr. Christina Reagan. Mm-hmm. We host it at Wake Forest University every July. And if you are interested in attending or presenting at the Neuroscience Teaching Conference, we are now accepting proposals.
Very cool.
You can follow us on Instagram, which is at NTC_conference. Mm-hmm. And you can go to our website, which is neuteachingconference.org. Or you can email me and I can send you those links.
I will link those in the show notes, folks. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. It's a super fun conference, and we have some really exciting things planned for this year. The second plug I have is what Alex gave a teaser on. So later in 2024, I have a book coming out called Science of the Supernatural, Critical Thinking for the Mind and Brain. And Alex was there when nothing was even off the ground yet. And I was having incredible anxiety at the prospect of having all of this ahead of me. So I've spent the last year and a half writing it, and now it's out for review.
That is
as
so
we speak.
Awesome. I love that.
It was such a fun project to work on. So the book is about addressing paranormal claims, paranormal experiences, but explaining them using science, mm-hmm. using psychology and neuroscience. So just for example, there's one chapter on alien abductions. And so we go through, okay, so all these people that claim that they were abducted, either they are lying or they were actually abducted or there's something really interesting going on in their brain. And like, no matter what, we should be looking into that. So the chapter does go through each one of those, but spends the most time on option number 3, right?
Yeah,
so we do a
right.
deep dive on memory and memory formation, and then also formation of false memories. So we talk about the psychology and neuroscience of that.
And it's got
it's
got my favorite topics in it, because you're also like linking biases and heuristics, right? These thinking shortcuts that lead to some of these supernatural beliefs.
Absolutely.
I love it, and I can't wait for it. When's it coming out?
Thank you. It was, I don't know right now, probably end of 2024.
Okay. And I see Cambridge University Press. Is there any kind of like early information about it, or is it just like, is everything behind the scenes right now?
Everything's behind the scenes. Really, I need to wait and see what the reviewers say about
Okay,
it.
fair enough.
I think there'll be more of a plan going forward after that.
Okay. Awesome. I will. I'm definitely going to keep an eye on, and I think listener, you should too. It's one of those. It's one of those books that's. I think with the way that Melissa just described it now, and the way that she was talking about it about a year and a half ago, at the conference that we were at, the way that she's talking about it is going to be so fun. Some of the more common supernatural things that you experience either directly in your life or have heard people talk about it, with real good science backing, and I'm so excited to see it. So thank you, Melissa, for talking about that and reminding me that that is on the horizon, and for joining me to talk about Requiem for a Dream.
Thanks for having me, Alex. This was super fun.
Well, I'm definitely going to ask you to join us again, and that's going to do it for this episode. Until the next one, thanks for listening.